So Queen Camilla storms out of a palace briefing, and within hours the story is everywhere. But the part that actually matters isn't the door slam. It's the detail that got buried in all the dramatic headlines. Her name was never even on the ballot. Not that she lost the vote. Not that she was considered and passed over. She was never eligible in the first place. And nobody told her before she walked into that room expecting to hear her name called. Like, that's the thing I can't stop thinking about. How does the Queen Consort of England not know she isn't on the ballot for a position she clearly thought she was about to win? Someone made the decision not to tell her, and that decision had to come from somewhere very close to home. Before we get into what this actually reveals about how the palace works now, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss the updates as the situation keeps developing. So, here's what happened. According to the internal accounts that have surfaced, the Royal Foundation, which is the charitable organization that coordinates the major philanthropic work connected to the younger royals, held a private vote for its next executive royal chair. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, received 6 votes from the trustees. William received 2 advisory votes, and Queen Camilla received 0 because the trustees had never approved her as an eligible candidate in the first place. She wasn't rejected, she was excluded, and there's a world of difference between those two things. One says, "We considered you and went another direction." The other says, "You didn't meet the basic requirements to even be in the room, and we're not going to pretend otherwise." That's a much harder thing to hear when you're sitting at a table expecting to discuss your new role. The executive royal chair isn't just a ceremonial title either. This role controls strategy, partnerships, funding priorities, and millions of pounds in charitable commitments. For Camilla, it represented something she's been chasing for literal decades: legitimacy beyond being the king's wife. She's carried public hostility since the Diana years. She's rebuilt her image piece by piece, and she genuinely believed this position would finally prove she was more than a companion or a consort. It was going to be the recognition that said she had real institutional standing, not just a ring and a title. So losing it would have been painful enough, but being told she couldn't even be considered, that's a different category of wound entirely. The moment the chief secretary explained that the vote was complete and Catherine had won, Camilla didn't speak. She just stared at the papers, and then she asked a question that nobody in the room wanted to answer quickly enough. Did Charles know? That's where the silence got loud, because the king had been expected at that briefing. He was supposed to be there, but he withdrew about 40 minutes before it started. His absence felt deliberate, like he chose distance when he knew the blow was about to land. Whether he was protecting himself from the confrontation or protecting her from having him witness it, the effect was the same. She walked in alone and found out alone. Then it gets worse. Camilla pushed her chair back so sharply it scraped across the floor, and she warned the room that no institution carrying the royal name could exclude the sovereign's wife without consequences. Strong words. But as she turned toward the door, she noticed the authorization page, and William's signature was sitting right there beneath the trust decision. The prince hadn't just heard about the vote afterward. He had helped formalize the process that kept her outside it. That's when she asked who decided she was unfit even to be named. And nobody in that room would look at her. The folder with Catherine's name stayed open on the table in the Queen's empty place as she walked out. Now, here's where the timeline gets interesting, and where the real story starts to emerge. Because after the door closed, one staff member leaned to another and whispered something that got recorded in the Foundation Secretary's internal account. The exclusion didn't start with William or Catherine or even the trustees. It started months earlier with a confidential warning that came from inside Camilla's own office. Someone on her team flagged concerns to the Foundation. That's the detail that changes everything about how this looks. To understand why the palace allowed that chair to remain empty and why Camilla was kept off the ballot, you have to go back to a private working lunch at Kensington Palace months before any vote happened. No cameras, no speeches, no ceremonial smiles, just trustees, handwritten proposals, and a demand from Camilla that crossed a line the board couldn't ignore. She arrived expecting cooperation. The meeting was supposed to discuss the Foundation's next funding cycle, just routine planning for which charitable programs would receive money and support. Instead, Camilla instructed the board to redirect a major family welfare fund toward a new literacy campaign managed by 2 advisors from her private household. The board chair resisted immediately. He explained that the money had already been promised to Catherine's early childhood program, which supported families who had planned services around that commitment. You can't just pull funding from programs that are already running and expect there to be no consequences for the families depending on them. Camilla refused to accept that answer. She insisted her position, as Queen gave her the right to reshape any initiative carrying the royal name. And that's when the chair said something that changed the entire atmosphere in the room. The Foundation was governed by trustees, not palace rank, and no consort could overturn approved charitable commitments simply by demanding it, which started as a disagreement over funding, had suddenly become a test of control. Catherine waited until the lunch ended before asking to speak with Camilla privately. She kept her voice calm and explained that canceling the program would abandon parents and children who had already been promised support. Camilla dismissed the warning entirely. She told Catherine she needed to understand the difference between personal projects and the wider priorities of the crown. William heard raised voices from an adjoining office and entered before things could escalate further. He told Camilla that his wife's work would not be dismantled to create positions for private advisors. She turned on him immediately, accusing him of treating her like an outsider despite her marriage to Charles. But the real danger emerged after everyone left. The foundation secretary prepared detailed minutes, a formal written record of everything that was said, including Camilla's warning that resistant trustees could be replaced. Those pages were sealed inside a confidential governance file, and later, when her ballot eligibility was being reviewed, those minutes became decisive evidence. Then the betrayal came from within her own household. One of Camilla's senior aides contacted the foundation chair through a recorded private call and warned that the Queen's office had already prepared lists of preferred replacements for trustees who wouldn't cooperate. The aide feared Camilla intended to bring the entire organization under personal control. Catherine gathered the abandoned papers after the lunch and noticed several trustee names crossed out in red ink. William saw the markings over her shoulder and understood this was no longer about one program. That same evening, he discovered Charles had been told everything and had chosen silence. So, fast forward to the vote. Camilla storms out of the briefing, but she doesn't go to Charles. She goes to William. The prince was waiting in a smaller palace drawing room with the vote papers placed between two empty chairs. No secretaries, no lawyers, no advisors to soften what was about to happen. When she entered, William closed the door himself. One of them believed the crown had betrayed her. The other believed he had finally stopped her from taking something that was never hers. Camilla placed the eligibility memorandum in front of him and demanded an explanation. This was the formal review used to decide who could appear on the ballot, and its conclusion had cut her out before a single vote was cast. She asked why he had authorized a process that refused even to consider the sovereign's wife. William kept his voice low and told her he had not removed her from an approved ballot. The trustees had reviewed the foundation's governance record, examined the confrontation at Kensington Palace, and concluded she had failed the independence requirements. Only candidates who met those standards were included. He wasn't describing a personal attack. He was describing a governance process that she had triggered herself. Camilla heard judgment, not procedure. She accused him of waiting years for an opportunity to reduce her standing. She said the vote had never truly been about charitable rules. It was about Catherine replacing her in every space that mattered: public loyalty, institutional power, and the future direction of the monarchy. William's restraint started to crack. He warned her not to turn Catherine into the villain of a decision she hadn't arranged. The princess had earned the trust confidence through years of work, while Camilla had entered the process with a victory speech already written. That single sentence struck harder than any accusation could have because it was true. Her office had prepared a draft speech that began with the line, "As your new royal chair." Charles had found it. He read it, folded it in half, and locked it inside his desk. He didn't destroy it. He just made sure nobody would ever hear it delivered. William then slid a second document across the table. It was the internal warning submitted after the Kensington launch, a written account from one of Camilla's own senior aides. The report claimed her office had prepared replacement lists and intended to bring the foundation under personal control. He refused to identify which aide had come forward, but he confirmed that every major detail had been independently checked. Camilla dismissed the warning as betrayal and insisted Charles would overturn the decision once he understood how the process had been used against her. That's when William placed one final page beside the others. The king had reviewed the ballot procedure and signed a non-interference statement, formally agreeing not to pressure the trustees or reverse their judgment. Charles had signed it 2 days earlier. Camilla lifted the statement with both hands, her eyes stopping at his signature. She set the paper down with this unnatural care, like she was handling something fragile, and looked directly at William. "You allowed me to walk into that room without knowing." William's response was simple. "He was supposed to tell you." She left not to challenge William again, but to confront her husband. The deepest wound was no longer Catherine's victory or the prince's signature. It was the possibility that Charles had protected the institution by sacrificing his wife's trust. Charles had spent much of his life defending Camilla against judgment from the public, the press, and members of his own family. Yet when she entered his private study, holding the document that excluded her, the king didn't rise to defend her. He remained behind his desk, surrounded by papers he had already read and decisions he had already made. For the first time, Camilla saw that her husband's protection had reached a boundary marked by the crown itself. She placed the signed statement before him and asked why he had kept silent. Charles answered carefully. The royal foundation was not his private possession. Even though it carried the family's name and worked closely with the palace, its trustees had legal and ethical duties to protect the charity's independence, rather than obeying royal preference. When she demanded to know why he had abandoned the briefing, he admitted he withdrew because he expected her secretary to prepare her privately before the decision was announced. He feared his presence would turn a governance matter into a marital confrontation in front of staff. Instead, his absence made the humiliation feel planned. Camilla's voice hardened. She reminded him she had stood beside him through decades of hostility, scandal, and public rejection. She said he had repaid that loyalty by allowing William's signature to become the face of her exclusion while hiding his own approval behind palace procedure. Charles didn't deny the pain, but he denied her conclusion. Loyalty, he said, could not require him to pretend the Kensington Palace confrontation had never happened. Threatening trustees and preparing replacement lists had made intervention impossible. Defending her after that would have placed their marriage above the institution he had sworn to protect. And here's something crucial that Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, learned in a documented private meeting with the board chair. Neither William nor Charles had controlled the decisive vote. An independent governance committee, the trustees responsible for enforcing the foundation's rules, had unanimously restricted the ballot before either royal man signed anything. The decision was made by people whose job was to protect the charity, not to manage royal feelings. Then Charles revealed something Camilla hadn't been told. The trustees had offered her a separate literacy patronage with its own funding staff and national campaign. Her office rejected it because the role carried no executive control. That refusal exposed what everyone had feared. This battle was never only about charitable work. It was about authority. She didn't want a platform. She wanted power over the institution. Charles removed his glasses and reached toward her, but Camilla stepped back. His hand remained suspended above the desk before slowly falling. She pressed her wedding ring against the non-interference statement without removing it, forcing him to see the personal cost of the decision. "If Catherine represents the future," she said, "then this palace must explain what place remains for its queen." By the following morning, that private wound had begun spreading through every corner of the royal household. Foundation staff removed Camilla's advisors from upcoming strategy meetings and transferred every chairmanship briefing to Catherine's office. The princess received a secure folder containing the 5-year charitable plan, a schedule of urgent decisions, and a list of trustees now waiting for her direction. Control of those briefings meant control of the foundation's future. Camilla wasn't simply losing a title. She was watching influence move elsewhere in real time. William asked the board to delay the public announcement for 24 hours, hoping Charles and the Queen might reach some private understanding before the news became impossible to contain. But the pause only deepened the tension. Too many staff members knew the result, and every unanswered phone call carried the threat of a leak. Catherine sat alone with the appointment letter and left the trust champagne unopened. When Sophie called, the princess admitted that accepting the position no longer felt like recognition. It felt like stepping into a room from which another woman had just fled. Sophie reminded her that refusing the role would not heal Camilla. It would only reward the pressure that had created the crisis. The Queen withdrew further. She canceled the joint reception and remained in her private rooms while aides quietly rearranged the king's evening schedule. When someone asked whether she would attend dinner with Charles, Camilla answered that the monarch had already chosen whom he wished to sit beside when the decision mattered. 2 members of her communications team requested transfers, fearing that continued resistance to the foundation would destroy their careers. One of them held copies of the prepared victory speech and the replacement list created after the Kensington lunch. Those documents could turn private suspicion into public proof at any moment. Charles refused to strike back. When Camilla's secretary proposed reviewing the trust palace access, the king rejected it and ordered that no staff member be punished for taking part in the vote. He would not use royal power to avenge a personal wound. Catherine finally opened the folder, read the first page, and closed it again. She placed the chairmanship pen beside a photograph of the late queen and whispered that leadership gained through another person's humiliation could easily become poisoned. Then she called William and asked him to arrange a meeting with Camilla. No trustees, no quarters, no institutional shield. Catherine entered Camilla's sitting room without William Charles' secretaries or security officers. She carried no vote papers and offered no rehearsed apology. The Queen stood near the fireplace prepared for what she probably expected to be triumph disguised as sympathy. But Catherine hadn't come to defend the trustees or celebrate her appointment. She'd come to say something no institution could say for her. She would not use the foundation chairmanship to erase Camilla, but she would not surrender it to preserve a false peace either. Catherine asked for 10 uninterrupted minutes before the public announcement. She wanted Camilla to understand exactly what she had known, what had been kept from her, and why she intended to accept the role despite the damage surrounding it. The chairmanship meant control over the foundation's direction, but it also carried responsibility for families already depending on its promises. Walking away would not restore peace. It would leave the work exposed. Camilla listened without softening. Catherine explained that William had informed her only after the eligibility committee completed its review. She had not contacted trustees, cast a vote, or asked for the Queen's removal. Still, she refused to pretend the confrontation at Kensington Palace had played no part in the decision. Camilla challenged that immediately. She said, Catherine always benefited from appearing untouched, while others made ruthless choices around her. William fought the battles. Charles signed the papers. The trustees delivered the verdict, and the princess emerged with cleaner hands and greater authority. Catherine didn't retreat. She admitted that silence could become its own form of power, and she accepted responsibility for not confronting the tension sooner. But protecting someone from consequences was not kindness, she said, especially when their actions had endangered charitable work promised to vulnerable families. Then she made an offer. Catherine proposed a place for Camilla on a new charitable advisory council, a body that would guide major campaigns without controlling appointments or protected funding. The role would allow the Queen to lead national literacy work while preserving the Trust's independence. Camilla remained silent for a long moment. Then she admitted what no document had forced from her. She had crossed the line at the Kensington lunch. She had mistaken rank for trust and believed becoming queen meant she would never again need permission to belong. She didn't accept the advisory role immediately, but she promised not to challenge Catherine's appointment publicly. As Catherine rose to leave, Camilla stopped her. The Queen picked up the unopened appointment copy and handed it back. "Do not make yourself smaller because I wanted the chair." The princess accepted the paper. Neither woman attempted an embrace. By sunrise, the secret vote had escaped the palace. The public didn't receive minutes, legal explanations, or the painful conversation between Catherine and Camilla. It received the single image, the Queen leaving through a side entrance with her jaw clenched while foundation staff remained behind the doors. Within hours, that photograph became a national symbol, either of an institution protecting its future or of a royal wife discovering that a crown could not guarantee influence. The Royal Foundation formally named Catherine as Executive Royal Chair. Its statement praised her years of work and confirmed that an independent trustee vote had decided the appointment. It said nothing about Camilla's eligibility. That silence protected her from an official rebuke, but it also allowed the public to imagine something worse. Charles approved a separate palace line affirming the Queen's continued charitable service. The King refused, however, to describe the result as a shared family decision. He would not pretend everyone had agreed when the household had nearly fractured behind closed doors. The wording was careful, restrained, and painfully honest. Camilla faced the story alone at breakfast. She unfolded a newspaper and found the headline waiting for her. The Queen who wasn't on the ballot. Beneath it sat the image of her departure. She folded the page inward before Charles entered, hiding the words but not the wound. The monarch noticed neither of them mentioned it. Catherine encountered the opposite reaction. A crowd gathered outside Kensington Palace, carrying signs, congratulating the princess and praising her leadership. She watched for only a moment before stepping away. The cheering should have felt like triumph. Instead, it sounded tied to another woman's humiliation. The pressure intensified that evening when a senior royal correspondent revealed during a national broadcast that the exclusion had followed a dispute over charitable funds and proposed staff replacements. The report transformed the story. This was no longer framed as a private rivalry between Catherine and Camilla. It was presented as a judgment about conduct, trust, and control. Then came the moment nobody expected. Camilla arrived at the Foundation's first event under Catherine's leadership. The Queen did not claim the central seat. She walked directly to the princess, shook her hand before the assembled press, and remained for the opening address. Catherine accepted the gesture without triumph while Charles watched his wife take a place in the second row. One photographer captured the defining image. Catherine speaking as Camilla listened behind her, unsmiling but unwilling to turn away. By morning, that photograph had replaced the storming departure across the front pages. Rejection had become endurance. The Foundation vote didn't remove Camilla's title, end her marriage, or drive her from royal life. If it did something more personal, it revealed that becoming queen had not erased the boundaries between status, trust, and earned authority. Catherine accepted leadership without celebrating victory. William protected the institution at the risk of family peace. Charles chose duty over instinctive loyalty, and Camilla, after storming away from the truth, returned to face it without demanding that the truth be rewritten. Catherine formally signed the 5-year foundation plan and promised to protect every family program already approved. She also created the advisory council previously offered to Camilla, ensuring cooperation remained possible without weakening the authority of the independent trustees. Camilla accepted a defined place within that new structure. The Queen agreed to serve as patron of literacy and community reading, a role allowing her to promote campaigns and speak for national projects. She would have real influence, but no power to appoint trustees, redirect protected money, or restructure foundation staff. The boundary was clear, and this time she accepted it. Charles faced her privately after the public event. The King admitted he should have told her about the vote before she entered the staff meeting. Camilla accepted his apology, but she also confessed that the deepest injury came from realizing she had expected marriage to protect her from accountability. That truth hurt more than exclusion. William visited her soon afterward. The prince did not apologize for signing the authorization because he still believed the decision was right, but he admitted that allowing her to discover the result from staff had been unnecessarily cruel. Camilla answered with equal honesty. He had been right about the foundation and wrong about the manner. Catherine's appointment now represented something larger than one victory. The monarchy's future authority would depend less on rank and more on sustained public service. The trustees trusted her judgment because she had earned that confidence over time. Camilla's defeat carried an equally powerful meaning. It was not banishment, it was not revenge, it was a boundary. The crown could provide position, ceremony, and visibility, but it could not force independent people to offer trust. At the first advisory council meeting, Catherine found Camilla already seated beside the literacy directors, rather than at the head of the table. The queen moved her papers aside to make room. The princess sat down, and the work began without confrontation, apology, or ceremony. The vote marked the moment the monarchy chose earned trust over inherited expectation. Catherine emerged with authority, William with a heavier understanding of leadership. Charles with a painful lesson about honesty, and Camilla with something she had resisted for years, a role limited by accountability. She had entered the crisis believing exclusion meant defeat. She left it understanding that accepting a boundary was the only way to remain valuable beyond the crown. Royal status could open the door, but it could no longer guarantee the seat at the head of the table.